Hey, folks. How are you? Yes, Steubenville, Ohio is the home of Edwin Stanton, one of my favorite characters from the Civil War. Hey, from Waldoboro, Meriwether, Columbus, Ohio, great town. Dover Foxcroft, my history teacher in 8th grade was from Dover Foxcroft. San Diego, Warren, Rhode Island, Berkeley, California, spent a nice week there this winter. Alpharetta, Georgia. And Facebook is here. Excellent. So let's jump into this today. An awful lot going on. Do you feel that there is just so much news coming at us all the freaking time? It's hard to even catch your breath. For what it's worth, which is obviously nothing, I've been trying to write really short letters this summer because I feel like everybody needs a break. And short is for this summer is still 1,000 words longer than it ever was in the Biden administration. Anyway, let me start with a bunch of questions and try and pull them together. First of all, one of the things that you need to know is that the Supreme Court of the United States yesterday released something else on its emergency or shadow docket. This is a docket that used to be used in the case where the Supreme Court had to hand down an emergency decision because something was going to happen very quickly. And under Trump, this Supreme Court has used this emergency or shadow docket really quite frequently for things that are not emergencies. And the trick to these decisions that are handed down under the shadow docket are that they are not argued, so there are not hearings on them, and they are issued without a decision explaining what the Supreme Court's reasoning was. So we're getting more and more of these decisions that simply are handed down and we do not know what the logic of them is. And that's really deeply problematic for a number of reasons, not least because the theory behind having a nation based in the law is that things change very, very gradually so that people can plan ahead and that they know what's coming and that there is a body of law to which someone can point to say, this is how we got to where we are. And the shadow docket does not do that. Anyway, what they handed down yesterday was problematic in a really major way, aside from that. And that is that they put a hold, called a stay, on a federal judge's determination that the Trump administration could not fire about 1,400 employees in the Department of Education. Let me unpack that a little bit. Trump, before he took office, insisted that he wanted to get rid of the Department of Education because he said it was pushing woke curriculum onto America's school children. In fact, the Department of Education has nothing to do with curriculum. That's determined at the state and local levels, always has been, which is itself a rabbit hole that I would love to go into, but I will spare you. But he wanted to get rid of it, and that was his reasoning. But in fact, what the Department of Education has done is it has dispersed funds to poverty heavy regions, localities that are from fairly poor communities. And it provided funds to enable children with disabilities to get educations. It also protected civil rights in the schools, protecting for racial and sex inequality in the schools, which is what the administration really seemed to be unhappy about. And that's gone all the way back to Reagan. So in order to do that, they, in March, announced that they were reducing the number of people at the Department of Education pretty much by half, and that they were going to fire those people and move the pieces of the Department of Education they wanted to keep into other departments, and that this was, their way to get rid of what they considered this woke curriculum. Now, just to be clear, what's at stake here is huge. It's even bigger than the Department of Education. And that's that Congress is the only branch of the federal government that has the power to write laws. So when the framers wrote the Constitution, there are 3 articles that begin the Constitution, and then it goes on into other things. The first of those articles is the one that lays out the rights and duties of Congress. And Congress is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Those are the only bodies that are allowed to write legislation. The president, which is in Article 2, has the duty to see that those laws are enforced. And the trick to Trump trying to get rid of the Department of Education is that Congress established the Department of Education by law and funded it by law. So for him to come in and say, we're going to get rid of this, is the executive assuming lawmaking powers that he does not have. And that is something that the courts have always stood against, and that just there was really never any doubt about this. When President Nixon tried to do something similar and the Supreme Court said, dude, ain't happening, right? I paraphrase. That's not actually what they said, but they said it wasn't going to happen. This Supreme Court, without any explanation for why, said it was okay for the president to go ahead and make the cuts in that Department of Education while litigation is ongoing over whether or not those cuts are legal. So essentially rewarding him for trying to break the law. So that raises another big question, and that's something really to be watching. If you are looking at how the courts are deciding cases involving Trump's actions, the actions of the administration, the lower courts are siding against him at extremely high rates. In that is regardless of who appointed the judges in making the decisions. They're pretty consistently siding against him. The Supreme Court is pretty consistently siding in his favor. And that's a really big problem, because it certainly appears to be that the Supreme Court is trying to create this super powerful president, like they set out to do just about a year ago in the Donald J. Trump versus United States decision of July 1st, 2024. In which they said that a president could not be prosecuted for exercising his powers during his presidency. And the Trump administration has used that statement really to say we can do pretty much anything. And there's a trick in that, though. In that decision, the Supreme Court basically said, well, because nobody's ever made this argument before, we, the courts, and by that they meant the Supreme Court, are going to be the body that determines what the president can do and what the president cannot do. And it's pretty clear that they are enabling a Republican president, but they would not say that a Democratic president could do the same thing. And in fact, their shadow docket, I think always, but at least almost always, decided against President Joe Biden, while it is now deciding for President Donald Trump. And if you think about the larger scheme of the American government, the three branches of government, what this is the Supreme Court claiming the power essentially to determine what the Congress and the president can do. And remember that the Supreme Court has been stacked with far-right justices. So what you're seeing is a very, very small minority of the American people having supported these 6 justices. But you're really seeing 6 people determining the country that has 334 million people in it. And this is a really, really big problem, obviously. So now there's another piece of things that are going on in Washington that people aren't paying a lot of attention to, and that you really need to be. And this is a weird concept, and it's a disturbing concept, and it's a really hard word to spell, which always frustrates me because I'm a really good speller, but this sucker I have to look at every single time. And that's that the Congress is right now considering a package of what are called rescissions. And what that means is that if you remember when the Department of Government Efficiency sort of came into existence, I'm still not convinced it was legal, but came into existence under the Trump administration, it instantly began cutting stuff, just cutting stuff willy-nilly. And again, the problem there was that Congress had created the bodies that this ad hoc, I guess, Department of Government Efficiency was taking upon itself to cut. And again, nobody had elected those people. They had elected Congress, and now you had this group of people in there just madly cutting stuff. Huge numbers of lawsuits over that. But right now in Congress, The White House has the Oval Office, President Trump's administration has asked Congress to approve a package of 9.4, I think it is, $billion worth of rescissions. This is money that the White House said, we're not going to spend. We don't want to spend this. We want to change the way you wrote the law by not spending this money. And now they went to Congress and said, now we want you to approve the cuts that we have made. So you can imagine there being cases where this is a good thing. So if the Congress appropriated all kinds of money for something and in an emergency and the emergency ended, or somehow circumstances changed, you could see Congress saying, yeah, okay, it's okay that you don't want to spend that money and we'll agree to that. In this case, the Office of Management and Budget under Russell Vought, who directs it, who was one of the key authors of Project 2025, has simply said, no, we want to change the government. We don't want to do what Congress set out. We're going to do it our way. And now we're going to ask Congress to okay that. And if they okay that, then we're going to ask for more rescissions. And essentially, we're going to reshape the government as we want it. Well, despite what Congress wants. And that right now is in front of Congress. And there's a big fight on it. The House passed the rescission package. The Senate has not. They're arguing about it now. Susan Collins, who is from Maine, she's a senator from Maine. She is the chair of the Appropriations Committee. And she is not happy about the rescissions because the administration also has not really articulated what they want to cut, what this money goes to. So they're arguing about it now. But one of the things that's in that you might have heard about are cuts to destroying the funding for National Public Radio and the public broadcasting system, the NPR and PBS, because the administration says both of them are left-wing propaganda. So that rescission package and what the rescissions that may come after that are bigger questions than just funding, which is big enough. They are essential attacks on Congress's ability and privilege to write the laws, and basically saying, you guys can go write whatever you want, but we in the executive branch are going to determine what we do with that money and what we do with those laws. And that's a push that has started, of course, under Nixon, and Congress said not happening. And so under Reagan, you got the rise of the real ability to try and shut the Congress out and aggregate power in the presidency with this concept called the unitary executive. And that is the idea that because he is the head of one of the three branches of government, the president cannot be checked by any of the other branches. He's super, super powerful. And beginning under Reagan, the Department of Justice wrote a memo saying that really presidents should exert far more power on legislation simply by creating signing statements that said what the president was willing to enforce in that law or not enforce in that law. And the person who wrote the memo establishing the concept of signing statements was Samuel Alito, who's now on the Supreme Court and has, has been pretty clearly involved in situations that certainly look like corruption, the same way that Clarence Thomas has been. So that idea of essentially getting rid of Congress or getting rid of the power of Congress and concentrating it in the president should really have everybody's eyes wide open, because what they are doing and what they have been doing since the 1980s is saying, we don't trust the American people to elect their representatives to make laws because they keep wanting things like Social Security and Medicaid and the Department of Education and the things that actually provide goods and services to ordinary Americans, and that costs tax dollars. So we don't want to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to find ways to claw the power away from Congress and instead to put it in the executive. And that's what's really going on with these two things going on in Congress right now, or in Washington right now. So one of the other things really to be watching in this, and that I spend a significant amount of time thinking about, is that while the Supreme Court appears to be trying to concentrate power in the Oval Office, really by determining giving the power itself to determine what is okay to do in that Oval Office, one of the things that really jumps out to me is it is not clear at this moment who is running things in the Oval Office. So we have this weird thing where we have the Supreme Court basically saying, yeah, the president is really all powerful. But when you look at what's happening in the Oval Office, the president doesn't seem to be the one making the decisions. So again, I always talk about where is power sloshing. Essentially, it feels to me like the Supreme Court is taking on that power, the majority of the Supreme Court, the right-wing majority. The three liberal justices, and again, liberal does not mean democratic. It means justices who believe in a government that regulates business, provides a basic social safety net, has a role to play in the economy, promotes infrastructure, and protects civil rights. The three liberal justices are like, you're just completely breaking the Constitution here, and they keep saying this again and again. By the way, the same way that the Supreme Court said under Nixon. Anyway, so what I mean by that is there have been a number of stories in the last week coming out that say it's not clear at all who is making the decisions in the White House, because you have apparently the power in the Oval Office is not in the president, who is really not paying very much attention to stuff. It is not in Attorney General Pam Bondi, who seems to spend most of her time getting ready to go on Fox News. It's not apparently in the hands of the Chief of Staff, the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, who's really focusing on making every day a reality TV show, which you can tell is happening. I mean, the images that they show, the clips that they're sending out, the Trump's constant sort of stay tuned messages are very much coming from the reality show side of things. And, J.D. Vance doesn't seem to be exerting much power. So who is really running the show in the White House? What a reporter for the New York Times last week, a man named Zingerle, said was that the real power in the White House is coming from Stephen Miller, who is giving marching orders to Kristi Noem, who is the Secretary of Homeland Security, and everybody else is essentially taken over Pam Bondi's job and Susie Wiles's job on policy. And so he's really calling the shots in the Oval Office. Well, at the same time, Tom Nichols wrote a piece in The Atlantic. He's a national security scholar. And by the way, a former Republican, he may still be a Republican for all I know. He's a true conservative, in which he said, who's making the decisions for foreign affairs? Because Pete Hegseth is just always, the Secretary of Defense is out there talking about, being manly and supporting, and just constantly talking about how great Trump is. But he doesn't really have any background in defense, and he doesn't seem to have any concept of what he's doing. And the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is also the national security advisor, and Trump seems to simply have no interest in what he has to say. And, he goes through the list of all the people who should be making foreign policy decisions. And at the end of the day, it comes down to a man named Elbridge Colby, who is the deputy director of policy at the Pentagon. I think that's his title, who's, somebody obviously not in elected office. And he's the one who, for example, said that the United States had to review its defense pact called AUKUS between itself, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, because he's trying to put the screws to Australia to force it to pony up more cash for that defense pact. And he is also the same person who made the decision not to send weaponry to Ukraine, despite the fact that it had been paid for, that Congress had approved it, and that it seemed that Trump was on board with sending it. He made the decision not to send it. So who is Elbridge Colby? I mean, this idea that somehow we're concentrating power in this office, and yet that office is not actually the one calling the shots, is a really important shift and a really important thing to understand, because this is, as Tom Nichols says, a hallmark of an authoritarian government, where power vests in a figurehead who pays attention to the very few things that figurehead cares about. And the rest of things are run by functionaries who either do whatever they want or just try to keep their heads down so that they don't lose them. And what this is not is an efficiently functioning democratic government. And that's a real problem going forward, especially right now as we see a couple of big things happening. First of all, numbers came out today about inflation rates, and inflation is going up again. Remember, under the Biden administration, it was coming down. It is going up again as the tariffs that Trump has in place, not in place, has in place, are coming into effect. And the tariffs, who knows where they're going to end up, but at the very least, they are at least 10 points higher than they were when Trump came into office. So we're going to take that hit. And every time you see in the news it's wonderful how much money the tariffs have brought in. And I hear this from MAGA people a lot. Oh, look, there's been all this money that's coming from tariffs. We are paying that money. Americans are paying that money. It is not foreign countries that pay the money for tariffs. It is the United States. And what that means is that the tariffs get passed on to the consumer within the home country. So that's what we're seeing there. And as these hits keep coming, that, for example, and the fact that that adults in the United States are overwhelmingly against the president's immigration policies. There was a real outlier poll yesterday. It was not from a reliable pollster. All the other polls, including the Fox News poll, which, by the way, is fairly reliable, show that Trump is absolutely underwater by, in some cases, more than 20 points on his handling of immigration. As this stuff, the economy, the troubles in the economy hit, and as people turn against Trump's signature immigration policies, you're going to see increasing pressure on the administration. But somebody said, you just wish I would look at something, and I didn't see what it was. Oh, history of foreclosures. Yeah, I have not talked at great length about the potential crises for the economy, in part because I don't want to add to that. I mean, this is a little bit of a rabbit hole I will go down. There is certainly a lot of psychological pressure that creates crises. Economic crises. And I am very aware of that, and I don't want to contribute to it. So I'm trying to be very careful in the way I talk about the economy. There are a number of places in which things look shaky. And, I'll keep trying to report on those without predicting what's going to happen for that reason. But that's a good translation into one of the reasons I won't predict the future. And that's because you just never know what's going to happen. The story of this week, with the caveat that, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have put that way. The big story this week is, of course, as always, ICE and the fact that the United States now is operating detention centers that are effectively concentration camps. And somebody has called me out for that and said, how dare you? That's Nazi language. Well, literally a concentration camp is a place where people are concentrated outside of the normal legal process of a country. There's a long history of concentration camps, which I have to say, unfortunately, I know, and I know really well. These qualify as concentration camps, the one in Florida, in the Florida Everglades. And I don't mean to downplay that. That is a constant, and that is uppermost, that we should have our eye on. But I've talked about that a lot. So what I wanted to talk about now, with the things that we don't see coming, is the resurgence of the Jeffrey Epstein story and what it is currently doing to the Trump administration. I did not see this coming. Maybe you all did. I did not. The story is that one of the big things that motivated MAGA and Donald Trump's supporters was QAnon, of course, which was a conspiracy theory based in the idea that there was a cabal of elites in the United States primarily, but they had ties around the world, that were preying on children. They were cannibals, among other things, but they were also sexually abusing and sexually trafficking children. And that cabal in QAnon was supposed to include Democratic politicians. And this is how we got Pizzagate, with the idea that Hillary Clinton had a sex ring under Comet Pizza in Washington, D.C., when Comet Pizza didn't even have a basement. Democratic politicians, business people, Hollywood movie stars, and Another group, and I can't remember what they were. I'm sorry. Um, anyway, the elites in the world, and that fed into the idea that Donald Trump was leading the charge against this cabal, that he was going to protect these children from sexual abuse. And many people, including Simon Rosenberg, who is a Democratic strategist, believed at the time, and I have to say I thought this was true too, although I didn't give a huge amount of thought to it, that this was in part a way to defang the potential for Trump's association with Jeffrey Epstein to really turn people against him, to say, oh, he's the big person out there protecting these girls, when in fact, he had a long history of being accused of sexual assault. And both he and Jeffrey Epstein, who was a convicted sexual abuser, and was facing additional sex charges when he died in jail in 2019. They had been very open about their friendship. They had been filmed together, ogling young girls. Trump had very famously said that that Jeff was a terrific guy, and they both loved beautiful women, and many of them were on the younger side. There were many ways in which Trump seemed to be involved in ways that would not play well. And I'm not talking about the legality or anything else. I'm talking about politics here. But that didn't, to me, that in my life, that was not on my radar screen in the last election. And it turned out that a lot of MAGA voters believed that Trump would, if he were back in office, release the files surrounding Jeffrey Epstein, and prove that he had not died by his own hand, that instead he had been murdered. They were very angry with the Biden administration for not producing more material about that. And they expected that Trump would do it. And of course, Attorney General Pam Bondi promised to do so as soon as she got into office. Kash Patel is now the director of the FBI, and Dan Bongino, both of whom were MAGA influencers, insisted that there was this great conspiracy to cover up what had happened to Epstein and the Epstein files, because because the cover-up was protecting Democratic politicians. So as soon as they got into office, if you remember in February, Pam Bondi actually said on the Fox News channel, yeah, client's Epstein list is on my desk right now. And, they promised that they were going to produce this information. Well, last Friday, I think it was, might have been Monday. I don't know. I'm never good at dates like that. The Department of Justice under Pam Bondi it released this memo that said, we've looked at all the material. We're not going to release any of it because it shows the sexual abuse of children. And we know now that Epstein killed himself, died by suicide. And here's a video from nearby his cell. By the way, it appears there was another camera by his cell that didn't work at the time. I am not really as up on the Epstein thing as I should be. I'm interested in the larger political story, and I just didn't follow the twists and turns of that whole thing as well as I probably should have. Anyway, they released this thing, and MAGA goes ballistic, just ballistic, and says, what are you talking about? You're not going to release this. You freaking promised us. And after that, on Saturday night, Trump released this really off the wall, really long Truth Social post in which he basically said, cut it out. Epstein doesn't matter anymore. Move on. In any case, the client list, the whole Epstein case was written by Democrats, and they're all out to get me, and you got to stop talking about this. Well, that just threw fuel in the fire. And then on Monday, yesterday, the administration put a ton of pressure on influencers to stop talking about the Epstein case. And it seemed like that might happen. And then today, because some of them sort of backed off, and then today it turned out that the film that they released is missing almost 3 minutes in it, which, again, I just can't imagine thinking in this day and age that you could pull something like that off. Apparently they thought they could, but now people have discovered that there is this missing time. I have no idea how one would do that, but they have discovered this. So now MAGA is on fire. And this, I think, is really interesting. My take on it is that this is just the final straw. That is, for all that people, and you've heard me say this a million times, for all that people talk about Trump having this really solid MAGA base, and there are those, certainly those people who are utterly committed to him, they are deeply divided amongst themselves, deeply divided. And if you think about it, there's a wonderful piece today by David Gilbert of Wired. Wired is very good on politics, in which he goes through how MAGA influencers have fallen away from Trump. So he lost Tucker Carlson over bombing Iran. He lost Joe Rogan over his ICE raids that are throwing people in prison who've never had a criminal charge, let alone a criminal conviction. Rogan's upset about that. Laura Loomer was upset about him taking the plane. Remember that, which seems a million years ago, but it wasn't. Taking the plane that somebody gave him. Ben Shapiro turned against him over tariffs. Elon Musk launched a war against him over the budget reconciliation bill. All of those things were places where, in order to take a stand against Trump, those MAGA influencers had then to side with Democrats. So even though they didn't like it, they took stands against it, it really didn't coalesce into an anti-Trump movement. This Epstein thing is homegrown. It's a MAGA thing. It's the Democrats were 100% not out in front on this at all. This fear has been created by MAGA, and it looks to me, again, I will not predict the future, but it looks to me very, very different than the other sorts of off-ramps that have been offered to MAGAs that they wouldn't take because they didn't want to side with libs, right? This one is theirs, and it's not dying down. It's actually increasing. It's getting more and more fervent, to the point that today, House Speaker Mike Johnson, who has been attached, pretty much surgically attached to Trump all along, took the opposite side, said that the administration should release the Epstein files. That's a really big deal. And it's a really big deal as the podcasters, what they call the manosphere podcasters, are just pounding on Trump. They are pounding on him. Because they think that he has betrayed them, and they're making fun of him. You never want him to, if you're trying to rise as a dictator, you never want anyone to make fun of you. And they're really seeming to entrench themselves against him at this point. And that has not been hurt by the fact his own behavior has been extraordinarily erratic. So you may not have seen it over the weekend. He was present for the awarding of the FIFA Cup to the winners this weekend. I think it was Saturday. And he wouldn't leave the stage. It was so weird. I mean, you can look it up. It's all over social media. The team's trying to celebrate, and he's just standing there clapping along, and they try and move him off the stage, and he just won't go. So they end up pushing him to the back. And then it turned out that he essentially has taken the real FIFA Cup and put it in the Oval Office. So they had to give a replica to the football players, what we call soccer. The whole thing was just weird. And one of the things that has made Trump such a powerful political figure is that people thought he was a winner. The minute he becomes a loser, all those people become up for grabs. And this is why I think Johnson turning against him on this issue is so important, that it seems as if there is a recognition that Trump's voters might now be up for grabs. And there certainly seems to be movement both trying to pick them up, but also recognition that if Trump can't command those MAGAs show up for him, if he can't get Joe Rogan and his people on board, and he can't get, Ben Shapiro's people and Elon Musk, who controls X, that creates way more flexibility among the Republicans to move in any direction that they choose to. What they choose to do is not going to be clear. But you have seen recently two of the more moderate Republicans, Tom Tillis of North Carolina and Don Bacon of, I'm going to go with South Dakota, but I could be wrong on that. Deciding they're not going to run again because they don't want to handle MAGA. But if that's the case, those sorts of people, not them necessarily, but those sorts of people could become independents and pick up the non-MAGA Republicans and perhaps some Democrats. And that's going to throw an entire new monkey wrench into the system, which, by the way, would utterly mirror what happened to the Republican Party in the late 1890s when they were 100% pro big business. I mean, they were just as you know, as they were very much, they looked very much like, you know, the oligarchical Republicans of 2015. And when they went too far, you got a whole bunch of people switching into a new kind of Republican Party that created the progressive era, and that was people like Theodore Roosevelt. So the movement this week has been just a really, really new moment in MAGA, but also in United States politics in general. Now, a couple more questions here. Somebody asked, where has all the money gone from these cuts? Why why do we need more money at this point if the cuts save so much money? You know the answer right there. The cuts didn't save any money. In fact, it looks as if the cuts from the Department of Government Efficiency are going to cost the government money because of lawsuits. So what you're seeing is that, well, the places where the United States the Congress has tried to cut things under the budget reconciliation bill, they have turned around and spent more than that by adding $170.7 billion to border enforcement, to ICE and to detention facilities and to the military and to some other things that they care deeply about. So your tax dollars, instead of going to Medicaid, for example, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, will instead be going to ICE and to tax cuts for the very wealthy. I got a real problem with that, and I feel like everybody should, but that's me. All right. One more thing here. Somebody asked about Democratic coalitions and what's going on. And what I would say is this. You can see, if you're looking around, you can see a lot of people talking about a lot of different issues. They have not yet come together under those issues. And it's starting to be, not there yet, it's starting to be time for those coalitions to coalesce. But it's not, there's no giant, we got to do this tomorrow rush on that. We want new ideas. Zoran Mamdani from New York City, like him or hate him, he is articulating things that Americans really, really care about. Jasmine Crockett in Texas, and I could go down the whole list. J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, Adam Schiff, California, Chris Murphy in Connecticut. I mean, there's a whole lot of these people. Jamie Raskin, Maryland. All these people are articulating things that they care about and that their constituents care about. And that's the critical piece right there. What we are doing in this moment as a country, but also as individuals, is making it very clear what we care about and calling that out on a daily basis, both at the local level and the state level, but also at the national level. This is your moment to call and to write on social media and to record videos talking about things you care about and to put your voice into the public sphere. Because the way this works is really quite simple. In a district that has an election coming up, which all the House districts do, people who are running are going to be listening to hear what people say. And if they hear a whole lot of people talking about the cost of childcare, for example, they will recognize that if they develop a policy for making childcare affordable, people will vote for them. If they don't hear a peep about it, I promise you it's not going to end up on anybody's policy list. So this is the moment to speak up about the things you care about, and you're going to see voices increasingly start to talk about the same things. This is literally how it works, how you get political change. People who are unhappy with the system speak up about it. Politicians hear that, especially ones that are running for office, not necessarily in office, but running for office. because the ones in office have been elected with a different coalition. But ones running for office are going to listen, and they're going to put together policy packages that reflect what they are hearing in their districts. So this is the period when all that happens. And then as you move up the level, at the more national level, people will listen to what the districts are saying and what the people are saying at those levels, and they will reflect that as well. So I hear all the time, the Democrats got to do this, the Democrats got to do this. And I'm like, yeah, I'm happy for the Democrats to do whatever the Democrats feel they need to do. They are an institution. They preserve the mailing lists and the finances and all that. That's really important. But in terms of deciding what that party is going to do, this is the moment for people to speak up about that. And the same is true for the Republican Party and for independents as well. So rather than worrying too much right now about Democratic coalitions, right now is the moment to speak up about the things that you care about, because everything is in flux right now, not just the Democrats and the independents, but also the Republicans. And right now, the real power of the Republican Party is twofold. One is in that Supreme Court, which is a big problem. The other has been in Trump, and he is extraordinarily weak right now. So now is the time really to be articulating, especially if you're a Republican, what you actually want out of that party. Because the truth is, Americans of all parties are pretty much agreed about basic things we want our government to do. We'll tinker around the edges, but we do believe there are things the government should do. And right now, the MAGA Republicans are putting forward a set of policies that at best, is supported by about 35% of the people. There are plenty of people who have R's after their names who don't agree with that, and certainly I's and overwhelmingly D's. So speak up about those things, articulate the things that you care about, post them on social media, find friends, talk about this stuff, and put out into the world what you care about and what makes you happy, what makes you feel good about this country, and what makes you feel good about your neighbors. Because as I keep saying, authoritarianism cannot take hold in a joyful population. And a friend of mine just last night started just a fun thing on social media. And already today, 40 or 50 people have responded. That's 40 or 50 people whose days are brighter today because she took a leap yesterday. Everybody can do that same thing. And that's how we change the direction of politics. All right. I went on longer than I expected to. There was a lot going on today. I think I'm just about at 40 minutes. So thank you for being here. And don't forget, it's fine to look away and take some time to enjoy this beautiful summer weather. And we'll be here when you get back. But do remember to take care of yourselves and to invest in yourselves, invest in your community, invest in your states, and invest in your nation. But you can do some of those things while taking a break from the others at the same time. All right. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to write tonight again, as always. Everything I do is free. If you want to follow what I write, it's posted on Facebook and it's posted on Substack. Do not put in your credit card. And otherwise, I'll see you on Thursday. Thank you for being here.